Welcome to the Backs to the Wall podcast. Four mates talking all things football with some special guests and other sporting shenanigans thrown in as well. This week on the wall, after 369 days, the longest domestic season in English football history has finally ended. Leeds United, West Bromwich Albion and Fulham will all be heading towards the English top flight, and we'll be chatting about all the big talking points from this season's championship. As well as that, our Send Him to the Reserves feature returns as well. We each nominate a player who we think has been particularly poor either on or off the pitch, and we hope to send one of those players to the reserves. And it's the return of the lockdown accumulator this week, giving you our selections in the SPL, the Irish Premier Division and the Belgian Jupiler League. It's been a while, but the Backs to the Wall podcast returns this week. I suppose we should each sum up where we've been. Jamie, anything interesting happen in your life?
So a few weeks back we had to postpone our podcast because I had an incident where in the bath/shower where I fell through the shower screen and required 18 stitches. So we had to push back our recording of the podcast to the following week, and that's where I think it's Michael. You can take over from here.
I wasn't sure it was me or Andrew. Cut a long story short, I fainted. Wasn't too well. Just working too hard, I guess. And Andrew, what about yourself?
I've had a pretty eventful couple of weeks. I broke my ankle in 3 places last Saturday, and I've not been living my best life ever since. I had an operation Tuesday gone. I've had pins, plates, screws put in, so yeah, just wonderful.
I think this just put us back into lockdown.
But while all of this has been going on, the football has continued, and as well, I don't say the football's wrapped up, but in some of the leagues it started again. We had the SPL get underway again at the weekend. What else have we had? We've got the Europa League that was on last night. Champions League is on this weekend, so there's lots to talk about, but we're going to focus on the English Championship this week. And like I mentioned there, Leeds United, of course, the champions. West Brom, they're going up, and Fulham got the better of Brentford in extra time in that playoff match earlier on in the week. So deserved, would you say, those 3 sides going up?
I think Leeds definitely were deserved. They were the best team by a country mile throughout the whole season. I mean, they were first by 10 points and just runaway winners by the end. For seasons they've been known as kind of like the bottling club, but this year they've stuck at it. You've got to give credit to Bielsa. He's come in and done an amazing job and just brought in such a good culture to that club. And then arguably it's also where Leeds should be as a club. They're probably one of the biggest clubs within England, and it's been 16 long years for Leeds fans, and they've finally got promotion back to the Premier League.
But yeah, you have to give credit as well to Bielsa. Like you said, Andrew, he's led them to promotion. They finished 3rd, I think, in last season, and even with the break in football because of the COVID pandemic, it's a campaign where Leeds didn't really look like they weren't going to get promoted, and in fact, they weren't outside the top 2 since November, I think it was. So yeah, hard to argue with Leeds coming back up to the Premier League, and a very popular club, as you mentioned.
I think a lot of praise has to be placed upon Leeds manager Bielsa. I think his whole attitude to the game is something fresh and a bit different, and something that's really exciting. I mean, if we all remember Spygate from last season, where he basically sent scouts to watch the teams that he was going to be playing the next week in training. It's basically an unwritten rule that you don't do that, but he didn't seem to have too much of a problem with it. And yeah, he just his whole demeanour as well. He acts so calm, and it was really good to see when Leeds got it over the line. You could just tell the joy and elation in his eyes, and I saw videos of him as well outside the ground after the game, and he was sort of like just so joyous with the players. But I think Andrew touched on it as well, and that the Leeds, they are such a big club, and they've had a really, really torrid 16 years. I mean, they were down in League One for a time as well, and just couldn't seem to find the winning formula. But it just takes a manager with a bit of a different style to come in, and although they did falter last season, which I couldn't believe, I thought they were a shoo-in to come back up again. But especially after lockdown, they really sort of kicked on. And I remember watching some of their games and thinking how good defensively they were. they were just thwarting every team's attack that was coming at them, and it was just it was a masterclass from them this season. And it'll be interesting to see how they strengthen, or if they choose to keep a lot of the core of their squad that they've got at the minute, and to see how they'll perform in the Premier League.
I think as well, it makes it all the sweeter for all those Leeds fans, because you kind of mentioned the lows that they've been through over the years. You mentioned League One there, Andrew. You know what it's like to be in League One, and I think that they were in administration, weren't they? Isn't that why they went down to League One in the first place all those years ago? And actually, they eventually, when they did get out of League One, it was under the management of a former Sunderland manager, Simon Grayson.
Big Simon Grayson.
Was indeed, yeah. I think it just makes it all the sweeter for Leeds fans, you know, the euphoria of being back in the Premier League after the lowest of lows.
I think one thing for next season, they really need a striker, as Patrick Bamford isn't good enough to lead the line in the Premier League, I don't think. I think he's good enough for a Championship side, but he misses far too many chances, especially moving into the Premier League where you're only getting one chance a game at most sometimes.
One point I also wanted to make was that it's interesting when I was looking up some of the stats that Leeds have before this podcast here, is that each of the past 4 decades, Leeds have been top of their respective division. Like back in 1990, they were top of division, the old Division 2, and then 10 years later, in 2000, at the turn of the millennium, they were top of the Premier League itself, and then 10 years later, they'd obviously found themselves top of League One, and now they've just won the Championship in 2020. So it's something about the end of the decade that really, or the start of a new decade, that really spurs Leeds on.
So joining Leeds in the Premier League will be West Bromwich Albion and Fulham. What did you make of West Brom this season?
Well, they were all right. They were kind of like leading or pretty close to Leeds all through the season, but they kind of tailed off towards the end, and their form when we came back in or from the break wasn't very good. I mean, they've drawn 17 games, which really isn't good enough, and they really did try their best to bottle it. I mean, their form in the last few games, they picked up 6 points out of a possible 15, which really, when you're going for it or going for promotion at the end, isn't good enough. And on the last game of the season, it was in Brentford's hands, and luckily for them, Brentford got beat, who massively bottled it. Brentford just needed to win one of them 2 last games, and what did they get beat off? Barnsley and Stoke, I think.
Yeah, I watched the Brentford's last game of the season, because that final day was something special, and it just shows that the Championship in England is one of the most exciting leagues in the world. But Brentford just looked like toothless and out of ideas playing Barnsley. But it also shows, because Barnsley had so much to play for as well. They were at the other end fighting against relegation, but you could just tell the grit and determination that was there with Barnsley, and they wanted it more, and they were able to score late on. A lovely cross and a nice finish at the end of that, and Barnsley were able to stay up, but at the fate of Brentford, who unfortunately for them, and I would quite like to have seen Brentford in the Premier League, a small team who have been absent from the English Premier League for over 70 years coming up, but it's a shame. But you have to win your remaining games. You can't rely on your form before the last 5.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've actually got written down when we were meant to record this podcast was before the playoffs was being played, and I've actually said with that sort of form going into the playoffs, you wouldn't really fancy Brentford to get promoted, and you didn't in the end. I mean, when you're that close to the automatic promotion, sometimes it just knocks teams all to hell. I mean, they lost their first leg against Swansea. To be fair, they came back in it, but the playoff final was such a cagey match, and it was quite a bad keeping error from that David Raya. But to be fair, that Thomas Frank has done a really good job, and I really like Brentford as a club. Like, their recruitment and transfer policy is really good, but it just really wasn't to be for them.
Wasn't to be, and I think you've both mentioned it there. They had a chance to get promoted against Barnsley. They then had a chance to get promoted against Stoke and lost. A chance for promotion against Barnsley and lost, and then the game against Fulham, obviously, which they lost after extra time. So you'd have to say Fulham were worthy winners in the end of that match, and that's 9 times now Brentford have been in the playoffs over the years, and 9 times they've failed to come through them. So I would be siding with both of you. I would quite like to have seen Brentford come up, but like you say, it just wasn't meant to be in the end. And Joe Bryan, was it in the end, scored the 2 goals, an unlikely hero. So I don't really have anything against Fulham either, but it would have been nice to see Brentford go up.
I think it's quite nice to see new teams get promoted. I mean, I've got nothing against West Brom either, but they just seem to be such like a yo-yo club. And I mean, Fulham, they just got relegated the season before and promoted again, and it's kind of almost frustrating when you see teams just do that back and forward all the time.
I do have to say that I've got a lot of respect and admiration for Scott Parker, the Fulham manager. Just, I mean, he took over, what was it, the end of last season or start of this season? Just, what was that? Do you know?
The end of last season.
Yeah, he took over at the end of last season and has just done superbly well. I know that they didn't get one of the automatic places and they had to go through the playoffs, but the team that he's assembled is just brilliant. And I think with him at the helm next season that they'll, well, I don't want to curse them now, but I don't think they'll push it in the top half, but I reckon that they won't be in too much trouble of relegation. And it shows also last season with Derby and Frank Lampard. He basically got the Chelsea job after his showing, and Fulham have gone and done one better than that. So I wonder if bigger clubs will be sniffing about the possibility of taking Scott Parker away from Fulham.
Well, Fulham will probably end up spending a load again in the summer because they did when they were in the Premier League last. So I don't know. You could match them with maybe Aston Villa's season. This just about hanging on in there. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see how they do.
I think the final day of that championship season has to go down most exciting for many years, and it'll be struggle to be matched because there was 12 games played on the final day, and 11 of them had something riding on them. Be that whether or not to finish second in the league, to clinch a promotion playoff place, or to fall into the relegation zone, get put down into League One. But Swansea, they went into it as somewhat rank outsiders. I think they were sitting about in 8th. And they needed a 6-goal swing against Nottingham Forest because they had a much superior goal difference. Because Nottingham Forest seemed to really bottle it, and they lost 4-1 to already safe Stoke, while Swansea went and won 4-1 against Reading. So if you're a Nottingham Forest fan, I can't even imagine the sort of the mixture of emotions, thinking at the start of the day that you're 100% going to be almost guaranteed a place in the playoffs, and then somehow your team lose 4-1 and the team chasing you win 4-1 and then end up getting promoted on goal difference.
Nottingham Forest has to be one of the biggest bottle jobs in history. In the last 5 games, they picked up 2 points and they only needed 1 more point. Well, not even 1 more point, just to concede 1 less goal. And then they would have still been in the playoffs, but it's just mental. That last game of the season, like you say, having so much riding on it with the relegation zone as well, it was just crazy. And I think it adds to how the Championship is one of the best leagues in the world for excitement, because every year there's drama at every end of the table.
I have to go back to 2011 to find a Championship game week that had more goals. It was 45 goals scored in those 12 matches. Yeah, and I'm saying that hasn't happened for 9 years, and that happened in the final day. So it was just brilliant. I was watching it on my phone and I was switching between matches, but as I say, I was keen to bring Barnes the game, and I suppose this would be interesting or a good point to switch to the other end of the table.
Yeah, I think it was kind of just madness at the bottom of the table. The way it changed in the last few games. I mean, I think all 3 teams that started in the bottom 3 before the games kicked off could have stayed up, which was just mental. But then in the bottom 5 teams with 5 games to go in the Championship, none of them went down, which is incredible, really. And it adds to the point of the stupidity, or whatever you want to call it, of the points per game. It just shows how much a season can change with 5 games left.
Yeah, and I want to add to your point there. It was before I had a screenshot of the table before lockdown, and yeah, as you say, the bottom 3 relegation, and that just comes up. I want to just take it up the road to Scotland for a second. And when Hearts finished bottom, and they were a little bit off, and they were almost stranded at the bottom. But the Partick Thistle were 2 points behind with a game in hand and they've been relegated because obviously the virus, and Stranraer also got relegated from League One into League Two. But it just shows that anything can happen in football. And Thistle still had 9 games still to play, and we ended up getting relegated. So it just adds to how in the English Championship they managed to get things back underway, and none of the bottom 5 teams finished in the bottom. So just shows you what can change.
Yeah, it's even crazier when you think about it, because when the season finished, Barnsley, Charlton and Hull were in the relegation spots, and then of course Wigan get that 12-point deduction, and that saves Barnsley's skin in the end. So Barnsley remain in the Championship, and Wigan go down, and it just really was a kind of roller coaster ride of a season.
Just going back to how much of a shame it is for Wigan. They, for much of the season, well, I think they're actually the record holders this season for having been in the winning position more than any other team and then thrown it away and either drawing or losing. I've got 35 points that they dropped this season. And I mean, teams are going to have that all the time where they're 1-0 up and they end up drawing or losing the game. But if they just held on in any of those games and clinched a couple more points, they would have stayed up despite the points deduction that they suffered due to the administration that they went into. So it is a real shame, but at the same time, it made it such an exciting final day. With
again, when you were saying about Wigan, it's just a travesty what's happened to them. It should never have happened, them getting deducted points or whatever. I mean, the EFL need to hang their heads in shame, really, because a week after new owners came in and supposedly passed their fit and proper test, they went into administration. I just don't understand how that works, and it's not the owners that kind of get punished for that. It's the fans, the players, everyone associated with the city. And I think the EFL, the way they've handled the entire season, has just been an absolute joke. They just look like a really badly run organisation. You look at Bury at the start of the season, and Bolton added to that. They chucked Bury out. Bolton were on, I don't know how many points they got points they got deducted, but loads in there. And then they allow far too many chances to come into clubs. You look at Hull, added to that in the category of bad owners. Their owners sold 2 of their best players, and that Jared Byrne and someone else, I think, and that ultimately led to them getting relegated in the end.
I think it'd be interesting to speak a little bit here about Charlton, who ended up finishing 22nd and going down. And we spoke a couple of weeks ago, or a bit more than that now, but about how Charlton's key players, and one of those is Lyle Taylor. He'd been their top goal scorer this season and was a talisman for them, refusing to play any longer than when COVID-19 was preventing the leagues from starting, and because he wanted to move somewhere else. So, I mean, if they again themselves had picked up a couple more points, they wouldn't have been in the position they're in. And you'd like to think that with a striker who's been in great form like Taylor has this season, they would be able to do that. So it's a real shame for the fans especially, and I'm sure the other players and the staff at Charlton, that they've suffered relegation, and it could be linked to these 3 players, I think it's 3, refusing to play since lockdown stopped and the football was able to commence.
Well, that's the thing. Charlton just needed 1 more point and they would have stayed up. But then they also could have stayed up with another bizarre thing the EFL have done with the Sheffield Wednesday points deduction. They've been handed a 12-point deduction, but for next season, which I don't understand either. And then there's still talk of Derby maybe getting one as well. But just the way they seem to have handled things, it's just been shocking. And I think Neil Warnock summed it up pretty well going into the last few games, saying that the teams needed to know what's going on, as they should know. And I think the craziest news of all coming out from the end of the Championship season was Birmingham retiring the number 22 shirt for 17-year-old Jude Bellingham, who only played 44 games for them, which for me, who's more of a traditional supporter, I would say, it's quite disgusting them doing such a thing.
No, yeah, it's absolutely farcical. I mean, there's great players around British football who have played over 10 years for clubs and not have their their jersey number retired. So it's just insane that a 17-year-old with 44 appearances has had that done. I know he's a Birmingham supporter and he's come right through the academy and whatnot, but I just think you have to do a little bit more than that to have your number retired.
So we'll move on to our reserves feature. Who will we be sending to the reserves this week?
Well, this is probably a record for myself, but for 2 nominations in a row, I'm not nominating a Sunderland player, although this player has probably scored against us a few times. I'm going for current Inter Milan loanee, soon to be permanent signing, Alexis Sanchez. Sanchez is getting my nomination this week for what has turned out to be a disastrous move to Man United in 2018. Before Sanchez's move to Man U, he was still largely respected as one of the game's top players. I actually had the pleasure of seeing him score at the Nou Camp in 2014 in a 2-2 draw against Getafe. To be fair to him, he was actually a great player at Barcelona and Arsenal. Yeah, on paper, this was an excellent signing for Man U, as Sanchez was a key player for Arsenal and probably the only player that was kind of holding them together as a good team at the time. I think he scored 80 goals in about 160 games for Arsenal and was probably the type of flair player Man United needed. He signed a 5-year contract in 2018 when the two clubs did a straight swap with Henrik Mkhitaryan going the other way. But the main reason he's getting my nomination this week is just how badly it went for him at Man United, and so much so that he spent last season on loan at Inter Milan and is now reportedly going there permanently. His contract as well is ridiculous for a player that has barely performed for them. I think I've seen that his base salary is a reported $391,000 a week, but an added $75,000 per appearance, which makes him the highest paid player in the Premier League. And I think he has a ludicrous goal and assist bonus as well. He gets an annual fee of $1.1 million, but received a £24 million signing on fee when he joined the club, which is just incredible considering they shipped him out on loan last season. I think Inter were only paying half of his wages. This is the sort of money you kind of get here chucked about in the Chinese league, not the Premier League. And what made it worse now is that he's going to be leaving Man United, having barely done anything for them. Sanchez is probably a shadow of a player of what he was in his Arsenal days, which is a shame for a player who was so good. And it's even worse when you look at his goals to assist and how much it's cost Man U. I think I seen it was reported that it cost them $11 million per goal, $6.1 million per assist, $2.5 million per shot on target, $1.7 million per start, $1.2 million per games played, and $764,000 per chance created and $20,000 per minute he played. And he will earn at least $93.5 million before his contract expires, making him probably one of the most expensive free transfers in history. I think his move to Man United was a disaster for both club and player, as he played 32 games for Man United, only scoring 3 goals and making 6 assists, which is just terrible for someone who was on the wages that he was on. And then towards the end of his time at Man U, they weren't even playing him due to the excessive cost he was costing the club for his appearance fees. And there was talks of him being overweight and not interested last summer during pre-season, which is probably one of the reasons why Solskjaer got rid of him. He's now agreed to move to Inter Milan on a permanent basis, which has now worked out at around £28,000 per touch it cost Man United whilst he was there. And for him being one of the biggest and most expensive flops in Premier League history, Alexis Sanchez should be sent to the reserves.
So yeah, this week I'm gonna go back to my roots, unlike Andrew, and I'm going to nominate a 6'6" German goalkeeper who played 5 league games for Partick Thistle, and it was really just the old cliche, 5 games too many. But I remember seeing him on a couple of these occasions, and he pulled off a miraculous save from it was an offside shot from a St Johnstone striker, but that is literally the only good thing I really saw him do. He just seemed, he was our third choice when Ryan Scully and Thomas Cherney were injured, and that's the only reason he was between the sticks. But you can just tell why he was the third choice. He seemed to be a bit overweight and was a bit slow to get down, and the reason that I really am nominating him today is because he caused me one of the most painful moments that I can remember in football. Now, I know that the big rivalry in Glasgow is Rangers against Celtic, who are the Old Firm, but Clark Thistle obviously from Glasgow as well, and it's a bit of it's a rivalry as well, and it always gets my blood boiling when we have to play one of the Old Firm, and it's always such a tense occasion for me. And we'd played really well in a game against Rangers back in, I think it was 2016, and unfortunately Ryan Scully and Thomas Cherney were injured, so we called upon this big German lad, and he came in between the sticks, and Thistle were 1-0 up, and we were playing really, really well, and it was as if we weren't playing Rangers, or it was no Rangers that I've certainly seen over the last few years. They were really a lackluster side when I saw them that day, and if it wasn't for Joe Dodu, the Rangers striker, he equalised on roughly the 84th minute with an unbelievable volley. And you just have to sort of hold your hands up and say, right, fair enough. They don't really deserve it, but it's an absolute screamer that he scored. It was brilliant, and off the right-hand post, and it was really, really special. But what happened next just had me almost in tears. And it was basically on the 94th minute of the game, Joe Dodu got slipped in, and he was 1-on-1 with Stuckman. And so I don't mean to be too critical, because it's difficult for keepers on a 1-on-1. But basically, Dodu had not the best shot in the world here, and it just rolled towards him. And he just, instead of maybe sticking out a foot like I would see any other normal keeper do, or just pounce on the ball, he just sort of dived over it, and it went under him and in. And Rangers won that game 2-1 with that goal. And it was just horrendous. I dislike Rangers a lot at the best of times, but that day was just unbelievable. And it was needless to say, he didn't make many more appearances for us after that. And he went down to Chesterfield, I think, after us, but he only played a handful of games for them, and then went back to Germany and didn't really make too many appearances. I think only about 7 for Fortuna Dusseldorf's second team. So my nomination this week is Thorsten Stuckman for giving me one of the most unhappy memories that I've had as a Thistle fan.
Yeah, well, incidentally, I am also nominating a goalkeeper, and it's a goalkeeper that Andrew will be very familiar with, and a football match that I will never, ever forget. Not only because it was my first trip to the Stadium of Light, but I witnessed possibly the 4 greatest goalkeeping howlers. Well, more just because it was 4 in one match of football is the totally baffling thing, but it was Sunderland against Millwall, and I don't imagine this would have been a great time for Sunderland in terms of their goalkeepers. They had Robin Reuter and
Jason Steele.
Yeah,
and
Jason Steele.
Then we had the pleasure of Lee Camp.
Lee Camp came in on loan, didn't he?
Yeah.
But it's Robin Reuter who I am nominating this week, and it is for his performance in the one match that I did see at the Stadium of Light. And I'll never forget it, because it was George Saville who scored the 2 goals against Reuter, and George Saville, of course, is Northern Irish. The first one, they're both free kicks. The first one, Robin manages to almost palm down into the ground, and it squeezes between his legs into the net. And then the second one is twice as bad. In fact, he kind of he throws himself at the post as the free kick's coming in, and somehow George Saville scores again. But the match finishes 2-2. And I mean, I don't really have anything else against Robin Reuter, apart from the fact that he came out and lambasted the Sunderland Till I Die Netflix documentary, because he claimed that it showed him in a terrible light. It only showed his bad mistakes. The problem is that there were a few of them. And he goes on this rampage about how many clean sheets and stuff that he kept at Sunderland, but he didn't really last very long, and he ended up back out at I think he's still at he's at Willem now, but he's back out in the Dutch league. And you actually can go and watch the video online. It's called Robin Reuter v Jordan Archer, and it's 4 goalkeeping howlers in one game, and it is unbelievable. And I think as well, before that, you'd be saying, Andrew, that there hadn't been many goals in Sunderland games recently. Well, I got to see 4, and they were honestly four of the biggest howlers you'll ever witness in a football match. And for that reason, I'm nominating Robin Reuter.
Yeah, I think the worst thing about that, Robin Wright was, in my opinion, the best out of the three goalkeepers we had that season. But I remember being at that game, and it was just ridiculous. I think I was speechless at all goals. I mean, I think Jordan Archer made the first error, and then Reuter did two, and you're just thinking, what on earth's going on? But the fourth one, I think Jordan Archer's second error, I think is the worst out of the lot, although arguably Reuter's first free kick is really bad, but yeah, it was just a horrific day for goalkeepers.
I mean, yeah, the first one, it was Lewis Graben scored the first one, and like it wasn't great from Jordan Archer, but they just get progressively worse as the match goes on. And I think it was only whenever we got back and we watched again, we realised how bad it was. Like he flings himself at the post, and he just gets it all wrong. And yeah, then to come out and say that the club had showed him in a bad light, I mean, you're just thinking, come on.
It's also quite shameful. You take one of your friends to see your beloved club, and something like that happens in a game, and you're just like, Jesus Christ, what are you doing, boys? Yeah,
but I suppose we should vote. I went last, so I guess I'll vote first. And yeah, I'm going to have to side with Andrew on this one, and with Alexis Sanchez. It has to go down as, probably the worst free transfer that the Premier League has seen. And I think Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is probably doing the right thing and just cutting his losses and getting rid of him. He can be Inter Milan's problem.
Yeah, I'm going to go for Andrew's nomination of Alexis Sanchez. And although Michael did put up a stellar case for Robin Reuter, because although I wasn't at the game, I've seen it multiple times on YouTube, the highlights of that game, and the goalkeepers, I don't know how they're in professional football watching that. And even Jordan Archer's had a cap for Scotland, which I just cannot believe. But no, I'm going to go for Alexis Sanchez just because I really liked him at Arsenal, and I thought he was a fantastic player with great flair and finishing ability. But yeah, for whatever reason, it just did not work out for him at Man United. And when Andrew was talking about his contracts and some of the bonuses and clauses that he has in there, and for a player who really hasn't merited anywhere near the amount of money that he's been getting, I just think it's scandalous. So I'm going to side with Andrew and go for Alexis Sanchez.
Well, that's great news for me. Another player of mine to the reserves. I would have probably voted for Robin Reuter just for the nightmares that brought me rethinking that moment. But Alexis Sanchez joins the illustrious list now of players in the Backs of the Wall reserves.
Right, well, we will head into the last part of the show this week, and it's, of course, the lockdown accumulator. Did have our competition running a few weeks ago, and one lucky follower, of course, landed there. Was it a treble or a quad they had in the end?
It was a quad.
It was a quad, yeah. I mean, they didn't pick big, you wouldn't say they picked big, juicy prices, but a win's a win.
But I just wanted to congratulate Ennis. He's one of my friends, but he doesn't take too much to do with football, and I think he's really gone at random with the selections, and he's done better than I have recently with his gambling. So credit to him, and it just shows how little I know about football.
He's done better than all three of us. None of us have had a winner all the time we've done this.
Well, hopefully this week the tides will turn. So I'll kick things off. Before, I'll just remind everyone, the leagues this week are the SPL, the Irish Premier Division, and the Belgian Jupiler League. So in Scotland, I've gone for Ross County purely because I cannot stand Hamilton. Sligo Rovers at home to Shelbourne FC. They were 11-8. And in Belgium, I've gone for an upset just to bump the price up a bit. And I've gone against Club Brugge. I've backed Sporting Charleroi at 5-1. So a fiver on those three returns a whopping £178.13.
Not too bad. Well, I've gone for Motherwell to beat Dundee United at evens. I've also got Sligo Rovers to beat Shelbourne, and in the Belgian league I have Genk to beat SV Zult Wargem or Wargam. Not entirely sure my Belgian isn't quite there, but they're 10-11, and £5 gets you £45.34.
Well, I hope Motherwell pull through for you, because I really, really dislike Dundee United. But anyway, that's for another day. In Ireland, I'm going to go for a home victory for Waterford against Cork City. And I'm going to go over to Belgium, and I picked Club Brugge to beat Sporting de Charleroi. And in Scotland, I'm going to mix things up a bit. I'm going for a Livingston against Hibernian draw. Now, Livingston have quite a good record at home. They play in a plastic pitch, which I don't find particularly great, especially playing on or watching. I prefer on the grass, and I don't think it should really be in the top league in Scotland. But they have a great record at home, and although I don't know if I have enough firepower to beat Hibs, I do think that they'll hold them to a draw. And a £5 gives me back £51.98.
I thought you might have picked Partick Thistle this week, Jamie, with the Scottish League coming back.
Being like yourself, Andrew, it's been a really tough sort of 3 or 4 years. And Partick Thistle now find themselves in the third tier of Scottish football, although their latest relegation was due to COVID-19. So I can almost let that one slide from the players, but the heartbreak's all the same.
Yes, no, Jimmy does make a fair point. It is a total injustice for the team bottom of the table to be relegated. Well, I think that just about wraps things up on the show this week. We will be back next week, of course, with a brand new episode. Hopefully, as long as
unless no one gets injured again.
Hopefully our health continues. Do make sure you follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. You can listen to the podcast on YouTube, Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and we hope to have you listening again very soon.